Supply Chain Talk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Good afternoon and welcome to this week's episode of Supply Chain Talk. My name's Alistair Chariton, your host this week. And our topic this week is reducing waste in your supply chain. Obviously a very important opportunity and challenge for businesses to reduce their costs and reduce their waste, and also to appeal more to their customers and their ESG targets. So a very important topic to bring in today. I will be bringing my four guests on in a moment, and as always, we invite you to participate with the chat bar, the chat box on the right of your screen. So please do add your comments and questions, and we'll pick up as many of those as we can. And there'll be the traditional Supply Chain Talk mug awarded to the contribution we value most this afternoon. And after I've introduced my guests, we'll move first of all to a topical news story before getting back into the main topic. So my first guest today is Sean McCarthy, who is chair of the Supply Chain Sustainability School. Sean is a recognised leader in the field of sustainable business. He was awarded an OBE, a British honour for those that don't know, for services to sustainability and also for his work on the sustainability of the London 2012 Olympics. And he founded Action Sustainability in 2006 to provide consultancy to clients. And he has chaired the Supply Chain Sustainability School since 2012 and founded the not-for-profit knowledge platform ISO 2400 in 2017. So welcome, Sean.
Thank you.
Our second guest is Mahmoud Abulaja, who's a senior manager for supply chain and efficiency at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And Mahmoud's based in Riyadh. He has 15 years of end-to-end supply chain experience in many industries, changing value chains and operations efficiency. Mahmoud is a digital transformation and sustainability advocate, and he has an MSc in procurement and supply chain management and a BSc in industrial engineering. And he's also an MSIPS chartered status and an EFQM transformational leader. So a highly qualified panelist, thank you. And our third guest is Anthony Jenkins, senior product manager for sustainability at Amazon. Anthony is based in the USA in Salt Lake City. He's currently a senior product manager for sustainability at Amazon Business, where he's been for 6 years. And prior to that, he worked in procurement as a federal contractor to the US Department of Energy with Lockheed Martin and Honeywell. And our final panelist, who I think is here, but I'll introduce her, and it's possible she may not be joining, is Sarah Robbins, who is Global Supplier Sustainability Lead at Johnson Matthey. And Sarah is a procurement executive with more than 15 years experience in procurement, supply chain and risk management, working in various countries for brands such as GE, AstraZeneca, and most recently Johnson Matthey. And she's also a trustee of the Alice charity, which is a poverty relief and community advancement charity. So hopefully Sarah will be with us momentarily. So let's move now to our news story, and it's one that certainly those of us in the UK will probably have noticed a week or two back, which is that the Scottish government reluctantly delayed until October 2025 at the earliest their planned deposit return scheme. So this was in a way a sort of classic glass recycling scheme, and they had to remove this scheme from their planned sort of recycling initiatives because partly sort of, largely political, to do with the fact that the UK government wanted it to be in alignment with UK schemes, but the schemes in the rest of the UK haven't actually been launched or finalised yet. So, yeah, one could say it's a slightly confusing picture, to be a bit charitable, but it did highlight some of the real sort of needs of schemes like this, which is, do schemes like this have to be interoperable, i.e., if they don't work, in conjunction and consistently with other schemes in neighbouring countries or neighbouring territories, there's a real problem. If you have in, say, Europe, or indeed in many parts of the world, people can freely move across borders. They might buy things in one country and dispose of them in another country. If you haven't got interoperability, you've got big problems. And it just highlights, I suppose, some of the challenges in schemes like this. It was first announced in May 2020, so 3 years on. They were on the verge of announcing it for launch next year, and now it looks like it's not going to happen for 5 years since it was first sort of voted through Parliament. So it does highlight that I think we'd all agree these are good schemes, but they can take a long time to come to fruition. So, having sort of introduced the complications and challenges that can emerge, perhaps Sean, first of all, what do you think about these things? Is that fairly typical? Are deposit return schemes with financial incentives for consumers really the best way forward? What are your thoughts on this delay of this much touted scheme?
Yeah, I mean, it's really embarrassing, the political side and, the sort of bureaucracy that gets in the way of doing these things. And why can't we just implement these schemes? They seem to be, on the face of it, relatively simple. But then, having said that, sort of things like deposit return schemes for domestic waste, potentially that's scratching the surface of the problem. There's an awful lot more that we can do with industrial waste, with single-use plastics, with the amount of packaging that's coming into the value chain. So I think there's a lot more that we can do. So if you look at a scheme like this, it could seem like tokenism. It could seem like, a government wanting to be able to be seen to do something, rather than actually tackling what the big significant issues are in our value chain. So having said that, it is really important to make sure when schemes are launched, to do with anything, but to do with sustainability generally, that there's the infrastructure there to make it work. So if I point, again, looking at the UK, if I point to the Green Deal that was introduced by the last government, and the idea was that you can retrofit your home with all of this wonderful stuff. You can get, air source heat pumps, and you can get, all of those sorts of things that would help you to make your home more energy efficient. The problem was that there wasn't the supply of the equipment, and there was a shortage of skilled people to actually implement this. And it was a fairly short-term scheme that only lasted for something like 12, 18 months. It was impossible to get anybody to do it. So the money was never claimed, because there wasn't enough thought given to the infrastructure. So I think it's very important when governments come up with policies like this, that there is some thought given to the resources that they need to make it happen. And I think it's also very important for governments to think about what's really going to make an impact, rather than what's going to look good for the politicians. And sorry, if we're going to get into politics, I'm very cynical about all politicians of all types. Okay. I'm certainly not party political. I'm just very cynical about every type of politician.
Sure.
So,
welcome, Sarah. I have introduced you, and I hope you're settled down and technical and delays are sorted out. So thanks for joining us. And Sarah, if you're ready, I know you've read the article in advance. We were just talking about some of the challenges and problems. Sean, perhaps with a harsh view that it's tokenism. Do you think these consumer schemes are really vital, or do you think it is the wrong priority, and what we'll talk about in a minute, the wider supply chain, is where you've got to really focus the efforts?
I think so. Thank you for having me. And yes, technical issues and everything, but I'm settled now. Lovely to be in this panel. I think so important that we keep talking about sustainability and waste management is definitely critical. I do think that everything starts with the consumer behavior and the awareness of the consumer behavior as well. So I do think that is almost like awareness of what is the right thing. So not necessarily taking into account everything that is said on the media, or everything that is almost like, what I would strongly, in my opinion on this, is that consumers should be focusing, and all these schemes should really focus on the science-based approach. And looking into developing solutions that don't make life harder, but more easy, sustainably. So I think there is the two lines of complexity of the issue are around out there. And I see my colleague nodding, Mahmoud. So I don't know if he has additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, no. Well, let's move over to Mahmoud. And Mahmoud, I don't know how things are in the Middle East, whether recycling is big and well established, or that it needs the financial incentives to make people do it out there. Oh, you're on mute.
It's starting to take off. It's not mature yet, I would say, but there is a good effort there. And I would agree with my colleagues, both Sarah and Sean, relatively. So I think sustainability is driven first by consumer, but also by government policy. Yeah, both. I mean, these are the strongest drivers into that direction. Consumer is the stronger, I would say, influence. However, still, governments have the responsibility to issue policies that support that direction. And at the end, we need more sustainable supply chains end to end. Speaking of the glass topic, I would say there are bigger fish to fry, such as plastic pollution, for example, paper as well. The deforestation that's caused by packaging and paper is, I think, a bigger fish to fry, if you want to call it. Mm-hmm. However, usually launching public policies has its difficulties, and at the end, you don't want to launch a sustainability act or a sustainability policy without really designing it well. And I would agree there that the infrastructure and the supply chain design of collecting all of that waste is extremely important. It should be sustainable as well. It should be efficient as well, and not waste basically all the effort of recycling into an additional energy consumption, I would say.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's some schemes, rather niche schemes where, kind of whether it's coffee pods and you can post them back or drop them back into a well-known brand's outlets and so on. And you do think how much transport is involved, versus what is actually recovered. But certainly it is interesting that, I guess, by making the consumer think about recycling, it probably has knock-on effects that then they're keen to say, well, when's the government going to standardize plastics, or, kind of when are their, retailers or, kind of FMCG suppliers to the consumer, when are they going to kind of reduce their packaging or whatever it might be? Anthony, what are your thoughts on this from the US perspective?
Yeah, so I'm no expert on glass in the UK, but I think when I read this article, zooming out, some of the themes that I noticed here is crafting a well-intended policy is perhaps the easy part. It's the implementation and the execution that's the difficult part. And I think this also underscores and highlights the realities that there are delays, there will be pushback, political and otherwise, and unknowns just around the implementation of these different types of policies. I work in a tech organization as a product manager. And so when I see things like this, there's upcoming regulations for a variety of sustainability initiatives. It makes it very difficult to know exactly when something's going to go into effect, or if you start building tech solutions for something and then it changes and the goalposts move. And so I think this was a very concise article to just highlight some of the challenges that exist, both on the policy side and on the implementation side, and how it has downstream impacts to impact the private sector or other supporting organizations that may be impacted by these policies.
Thank you, Anthony. And I won't read out the whole comment, but for those of you who obviously could see the chat panel, Grayson Moores has given a really interesting comment there about just the whole way things have changed, from it being seen as, back in the 70s, 80s as almost rather hippie-ish, a bit kind of, trendy and sort of not really mainstream to be worried about the environment, to, where we are now, where clearly, here we are discussing it. Every business and organization in the world, has got to take it seriously and are making genuine efforts. So I think we've all come a long way, but it's a tough journey for sure. It's easy to think of ideas. It's a much harder to make that practical reality work. let's.
If I may, Alistair, just to take into account Grayson's comment, because I think there is an underlying point there that my colleague just highlighted, which is the impact on the supply chain with those schemes as well. So I think usually, and that has to do with the democratization of recycling. We got somehow so detached from where things come from that we now are facing a difficulty in going back and understanding how things actually return to nature. And then when those schemes happen, sometimes they don't take into account that they might generate the let's say the carbon footprint of a scheme just to drive that change, right? It might have such a negative impact on different industries, especially small and medium enterprises who have much less capacity and capabilities to implement those schemes. However, they are binded in many cases by the same law. So
Yes.
I think there is obviously an opportunity for us in supply chain to drive that awareness, and especially in the public sector, to continue to drive that awareness more and more, so that governments, they think about the impact in the whole society, not just from a science point of view.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move now to our main topic, which is reducing waste in your supply chain. So a very appropriate link that we've already been recognizing how important it is to think about the whole supply chain. And one or two sort of interesting figures. I think in October last year, the Institute of Grocery Distribution, which is a UK organisation, had analysed or commented that food waste in the supply chain before it even gets into customers' homes is a real is the real problem, and in the UK it's estimated there's 4.2 million tons of food being lost or wasted across the UK food supply chain alone, and they estimated that there's a further 1.5 million tons wasted in the manufacturing process. Another stat is that 40% of the food waste in the USA is caused by the supply chain, but on the positive side, in the US something like 68% of paper gets recycled. So I guess it sort of indicates that some areas we can really make the progress, but in contrast, in the US, again, on data I looked at, only 6% of plastic is recycled. So it really highlights that things like paper and glass, we are making progress for sure. The tough ones are plastic, where there's just so many different varieties and there's not the standardization. So clearly enormous opportunities in the supply chain. So let's move to our first agenda point, which is using automated technology to handle perishables and recyclables across your supply chain. So, I guess perhaps coming back to you, Sean. There's automated technology to handle this thing. I mean, are you aware of that, or do you think actually automated technology is less effective than human beings sorting their rubbish and putting it in the right bins?
Yeah, I wouldn't profess to be an expert on this, but certainly, as you mentioned in the introduction, I chaired the Independent Commission into Sustainability for the London 2012 Olympics, and London 2012 was very much publicised as the first zero waste to landfill games, and part of my job was to say, well, is it really? And the answer is yes, it was, to a degree. It was. Nothing went to landfill. They did burn quite a lot of stuff, but nothing went to landfill. What they did was to really manage the incoming chain of stuff. Over the Olympic Games, it's a massive program of work. So an awful lot of stuff is coming in. So putting some very, very strict parameters around what was and what was not allowed on the Olympic Park was key, because, as you say, what's recyclable and what's not coming out, particularly plastics, is actually a very complex technical issue to deal with. So controlling what comes in was part of the success. But yes, I did visit a recycling facility. They took over an entire recycling facility for the duration of the games. Everything was transported by water because the recycling facility was up the canal a little bit further into East London, so that was good too. And I have seen this technology that can dictate different types of waste, and it blasted with a big blast of air into a certain direction. And I think that's a good thing. We should be using technology as much as we can. Much as, I mean, obviously you can say that you're reducing opportunities for employment, but believe me, a materials recycling facility is not a very nice place to work.
No.
You really don't want to work there. I'm sure there are more pleasant jobs that we can find for people than that. So, yes, the technology is available to a degree to sort waste. I think certainly looking at different authorities in the UK and different conditions around the country, unfortunately, every local authority seems to want to do something different, and the schemes are different. So there isn't very much commonality. And in some countries, there's far less infrastructure to enable recycling. So again, if I go back to my Olympics experience, I talked to the guys from Rio, and I said, well, we're aiming 100% waste diverted from landfill. What they said to me is, well, if we had 100% of waste going to landfill, we would be happy, because we don't have the recycling facilities in Brazil. We just don't have them. But actually, a lot of waste is dumped in the sea.
Yeah.
So for Brazil, actually, waste going to landfill at the time, I'm talking a few years ago now, would have been a good thing. So we do need to recognise that there are different levels of facility and resource available in different countries. So they do need different policies.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Sarah, have you got much experience in automated technology to handle perishables and recyclables? How important do you see it?
It's interesting, the Brazil connection, because obviously I'm Brazilian, so I'm familiar with what you're saying. I think, to your point, I am also not an expert on the topic. However, whenever we talk about circularity, we are talking about waste management inevitably. And I think what I have observed in different industries, chemical, food, healthcare, is that suppliers are starting to understand the output of, not understand, but observe a bit better the output of their production and what can be used as through the layers of artificial intelligence and so on, what can be used, and through heavily automation, how can that waste somehow come back? I don't think it is a new concept for supply chain. I think it is just perhaps more attention is being given nowadays, and definitely the impact that automation does is to first in cost, right? Because the output may become raw material that they can use again in the manufacturing process, reducing their cost. They can also sell to other companies depending on what the output is. And I think there is an element of really understanding other costs, right? Energy consumption and other things that are usually people first reaction is, oh, let's go and put some solar panels. I think suppliers nowadays are thinking more about how can we leverage what is the output of our production to support things like energy creation. So I think there is a very positive movement towards that. I think the question is pace. Is the pace quick enough?
Yes.
But there is definitely, I can totally see a movement towards the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mahmoud. Your thoughts on the role of automated technology?
Automation is proven to be more efficient in general. I would agree on the complexity degree. However, I've seen some multiple packaging companies in different geographies that are basically collecting the recyclable products that they produced, and they are recycling into new products. And don't forget, from a cost perspective, 60 to 70%, for example, at least of a cost of a bottle, for example, a plastic bottle, is raw materials. So when you collect the recyclable part and remold it again into a new bottle, you're saving a lot in that degree. However, I think still automation is still expensive due to the degree of complexity. I think AI and machine learning will help advance that area going forward. However, I think it's still a challenge, I would say, to really filter out what is recyclable and what is not at this moment of time, because it's not a sort of a physical attribute. I think it's more of a chemical attribute per se. I wouldn't say I'm a real expert in that. I only took polymers engineering back in the university, and I haven't used it since. So.
Yeah. Well, I think it does tie into the automation in automated technology does need to be able to kind of recognize materials, and that's all back to standards. And do you have standardized logos or standardized identifiers of some kind? I guess. Turning to you, Anthony, what are your thoughts on how effective automated technology can be in recycling?
Yeah, so I have to admit, when I saw this question, when I see automated technology, one of my guilty pleasures, I guess, is plugging in these questions into Bard or ChatGPT and seeing what automated technology itself thinks about opportunities for automated technology. So I had some fun looking at that, and actually some pretty insightful or responses there. But we've talked a little bit earlier how this may have been viewed as like a hippie mindset in the past, but really reducing waste is a good business decision. Even if you're not the tree hugger or the planet lover or whatever it might be, if you're running an organization and you want it to be lean and efficient, you must identify areas of waste. And I think that's probably one of the best things that automated technology can do, is identify trends and do in-depth analysis to see where is there leakage in your supply chain? Where are there opportunities for more efficiency? And when you do that, I think it has great impacts down the road. I know, working at Amazon and working largely with B2B and government procurement organizations, they love that we have the ability to help them identify only the products that come in curbside recyclable packaging, or only the products that don't contain PFAS materials or whatever it might be. And automated technology really is helpful in identifying what you want more of, what you want less of, and then implementing some tools or some suggestions along those lines.
Great, thank you. Well, that leads nicely to our second point, which is how can analytics reduce waste across your supply chain? And I guess, there's some organizations do follow the sort of three strategies of reduce your waste, recycle your waste, and repurpose your waste. Whether that's kind of being able to kind of reuse products at end of life and refurbish them and reissue them in some different format. So I guess analytics can help with all those. And Sean, turning to you again, interesting Anthony's example there, that just being able to understand all the product details, which I guess Amazon has got the clout to do. You can really insist that every single product that you retail, the data is provided. And if you say you've got to give us your recyclable or packaging details, I guess they toe the line. Whereas for a lot of businesses, that's harder to get that raw data correct in the first place. Sean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the raw data is a real challenge. It's been quite interesting. Again, in the UK, it was the first government to introduce a plastics tax, and that's looking at the percentage of single-use plastics that are coming into the value chain and placing a tax on plastic that is not recycled to a certain level. We did some work with the UK housing sector looking at this. So within the supply chain school that I run in the UK, we've got the 10 biggest housing developers in the UK are all partners in the school. And they came together to do some work ahead of the plastics tax being implemented, to start to understand what was coming in by way of packaging for the products that they need to build houses. And the supply chain had no idea. We had some lovely software that can analyze all of the information and start to produce some insights for you. But actually going out to the supply chain and saying, tell us what the stuff that you're selling us, tell us what it's wrapped in, tell us what type of plastic it is, tell us what the recycled content of that plastic is. And they did not know. And it became a real mission to understand what was coming in. Now, okay, once you have that information and you start to understand it, then you can start obviously to do something about it. And the housing sector and many other sectors in the UK have been driven by legislation to do this. Otherwise, they probably would never have done it. So I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm sure it's not that easy for Amazon because you retail an awful lot of stuff. So to get information on absolutely everything must be just as much of a nightmare. Yeah. So, but data is key. And you know we have the software to analyze the data. There's plenty of software out there. There's plenty of solutions. There's plenty of ways to recycle, plastics in particular, or recycle many products. But actually developing that understanding down into the various tiers of the supply chain. Because if you look at a house builder, they're bringing in kitchens, they're bringing in bathroom pods, they're bringing in bricks and plasterboard and all of those things. And the depth and breadth of the supply chain that brings that stuff in is immense because they tend to use local suppliers, local to where they're developing.
Absolutely.
So gathering that information is one hell of a challenge.
Yeah, no, and it's a real. I mean, in my experience, I'm sure with all of you, the quality of your data, your product data, is so critical, but it's always a lower priority for businesses. It's just not exciting. They've always got better projects on the go, and it's just incredibly hard work if you've got in a situation where your industry or your business just doesn't have really good quality product data. It is not an easy one to fix. It takes a lot of work, a lot of details with many suppliers. Before I move on to the next panelist, Grayson, it's just thanks again, Grayson, share some really interesting thoughts, which perhaps we can just see on the screen, which is that let's not forget some really good technology, simple technology like apps like Too Good To Go mean that retailers and particularly retailers, I guess, and food outlets have now got such an opportunity to reach out to the wider public and say, hey, I've got some bread or some sushi, it's going to go tonight, come and get it for 20%, come and get it for nothing if you're a food bank. There's some real opportunities to disseminate products that are really about to go off, or not go off, but unfortunately a bit beyond their sell by date, and yet are perfectly edible. And so there's some great opportunities, I think, to reduce at the last minute that wastage. So thank you for those examples, Grayson. Let's move to Sarah on the technology, the analytics side of things. What are your thoughts on that one?
I think I'm just listening and agreeing with everything that has been said. I think definitely there is an element of awareness, and I wish that the science would really come down to normal people. You don't need to have a PhD to talk about waste management or circularity and all these things. So I think there is a lot on awareness that needs to happen. What I have seen is that suppliers are starting to understand more of their production with a sustainability lens, and that helps to improve data quality, right? So it's not data quantity, it's data quality. I think there is a lot of importance, but it all comes down to what Sean was saying, right? Is that awareness of what do I need to know about my product that will actually be important to drive some positive impact. If you just think about cost, and if you just think about the traditional ways, that doesn't come out, because then you're not talking about that quality. You're not going to get into the details of your polymers. So it's more about really taking a sustainability lens, which I think is a challenge for many business nowadays, because there is a lack of knowledge, or not lack, but limited people who actually can drive technical conversations about those topics. That is one challenge, is human resources, and then translating this into technology. And unfortunately, many people that are in technology today they didn't click that there is an opportunity with that sort of analytics as well. So it's still a lot of data collection and data quantity, but that data quality to support business improvement, I think, is still an opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mahmoud, what are your thoughts? I mean, I think we've all recognised the data challenges, but once assume you've got the data, how can analytics help you reduce waste across the supply chain?
Well, the opportunities are endless, Alistair, to be honest. I mean, starting from demand sensing, regulating demand on the shelf, going back to routing options and automated routing and rerouting, which reduces the carbon footprint, end-to-end visibility from supplier to shelf is also an opportunity for automation, just to name a few. I mean, there are much more, even if you go to shipping routing, deliveries. So it's really, honestly, endless. I think we've only touched the tip of the iceberg on that. But also to comment additionally, people are resistant to change in terms of sustainability. I mean, any change, people would resist in general. And this is why there's always the change management process and to go through change. However, once it's embraced and it's understood that it is beneficial and the benefits of that and the impact that it has, I mean, just to understand, for example, that sustainable packaging, for example, is a marketing kind of tool for the product. I mean, I've read a couple of articles where sustainable packaging is driving consumer decisions. And if that is the case, I could predict, for example, boldly and say that there are the 4 Ps and the S going forward. So the S is sustainability and sustainable packaging as used for the products. And the 4 Ps are well known: place, product, promo, price. So automating demand, really forecasting what is required. I mean, it's really a challenge once you do it in an automated way. For example, I worked in dairy before, and I remember that the demand trend during the week was like a smile, having the demand manager there. End of the week, beginning of the week, we had a peak demand and we had a slightly lower demand across the week, for example. So automating that would, I think, enable a more sustainable chain.
Yeah, that's. I mean, you make some really interesting points there, and it's so. I think we recognise that when it comes to recycling, you may need to have a lot of very accurate and detailed data about the product itself, what it's made of, what it's packaged in, and so on. But we're forgetting, where you're reminding us that actually in the wider supply chain, it's not just that. It's as you say, if you understand much better your sales signals, and as in classic supply chain theory, you share those sales signals up the supply chain, then your inventory is better. You're not going to get waste of perishables. So absolutely, and of course, the more that we are into transporting products around, the more opportunity there is to really optimize those schedules. And I guess that leads nicely, Anthony. I know you're Amazon business rather than Amazon consumer, but clearly there's an awful lot of vans and so on going around the world or going around our cities and towns, all potentially having an impact on the environment, but equally opportunities to reduce that impact. So your thoughts on the analytics side of things?
Yeah, so I think there's really 2 ways to utilize the analytics. One is more reactive data, just on what happened, right? And then you can look at that and then use that to be proactive, to say where can we get ahead of these types of things? Again, get more of what you want, less of what you don't want. But I think in general, in supply chains, what we're seeing is suppliers have an opportunity to differentiate themselves, not just in what they're delivering or providing, but also in the services that are attached to that. It used to just be procurement. You buy something, you buy some goods. But now I think a lot of organizations are looking to their suppliers to guide and advise and consult with them to let them know where there are opportunities for improvement. I also think it's very important, we've touched on this, for organizations to have accurate data, but just objective data, right? I don't necessarily need to tell any of you what's good or bad. You can decide that for your organization and what's important to you. But without the data, you can't really make those types of informed decisions. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up, we talked a little bit about packaging. In an e-commerce world, it's interesting because when you walk into a physical store, you need that bright, fancy packaging that catches your eye. When it's sitting in a warehouse and you're shopping online, the packaging, quite honestly, can be quite a bit more practical. And so we're seeing a shift from some manufacturers who are going through e-commerce sales channels to make more practical packaging that's really just intended to encapsulate and protect a product, and they can reduce the amount of air or water inside of it or the amount of materials needed. And that has downstream impacts as well. You can fit more packages on the shelves in the warehouses. Less building space needs to be made. You can fit more in a van, and you can make more deliveries with one van trip instead of multiple. So it really does drive that efficiency when some of the consumer buying behavior shifts from maybe what's traditionally been to more of an online presence. So it's kind of interesting to view those.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, also thinking about the packaging, Amazon as, and other organizations, it must be said, increasingly are offering, collection boxes, collection lockers where you can go along and collect the product. And actually, in that case, it doesn't need packaging at all. I mean, if you're ordering something which is, you're going to take it out of its packaging and throw that packaging away as soon as you get it home, the consumer would probably prefer if it could be delivered in a little plastic tote and the tote is just put in a slot and you take your product away. I mean, it's there's all sorts of potential opportunities. So
last thought on that is that there is a trend in industry to do what's called ship in own container. So basically, you don't need the outer box. I see a comment in here, and I will readily admit that Amazon is an offender in this area. Sometimes when you buy one pack of batteries and it comes in a refrigerator-sized box, sometimes obviously that's not good long-term for Amazon or the consumer, right? That is waste. Now, there's probably trade-offs. I'm not trying to justify anything. There's probably trade-offs between efficiency and what's already on hand and the best way to get it to somebody. But I think there's real opportunities and consumers demanding a reduction in waste. Obviously, businesses will listen as consumers and businesses vote with their wallets.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads us to our final agenda point, our third agenda point, which is how do unsustainable supply chain methods impact your reputation? I guess you just touched on that with the comment from our audience and your good comments on it, Anthony. That it can have an impact if you're seen to be profligate with waste and so on. But I think it's fair to say we all experience our online retailers, and mostly it's pretty good. And we always remember the time when you get a big box and a small product, so one can be selective. But it does kind of touch on that. And actually, just before we get into that, Grayson again has asked an interesting question of how can we implement accountability and visibility in our supply chains. Again, it all ties in with that. So let's just see that there. And of course, it does raise the important point that it's not just the individual organization; it's the tier 2 and tier 3, and indeed, further beyond that in the supply chain where we need to truly understand the full carbon footprint and environmental footprint of the end-to-end supply chain for a product. So on the question of reputation, should we start with you, Sean, again?
They clearly have a reputation risk, because I think if we look at a business to consumer world, consumers are much more aware these days of things like packaging and excessive packaging. So there is a reputation risk, undoubtedly. But then having said that, there's in the consumer world, obviously with Anthony in the room and an organization like Amazon, there's a lot of benefit and convenience. Click, I'm going to get it tomorrow. And I think we've kind of got into that world now, and there's an obligation to deliver it tomorrow. And okay, if it gets delivered tomorrow in a bigger box than it should be delivered in, then it's going to get delivered tomorrow, because it's all about the customer and the expectation. So I think disruptive organizations like Amazon have created a whole new expectation, which is very unlikely to go away. In the business to business world, I think there's an increasing recognition that waste is cost. And you bring stuff into my operation that has packaging that I can't get rid of. I need to pay to get it out of my of my organisation. And a lot of work has been done on the impact in the building industry. The true cost of a skip, because I put stuff in a skip on a building site, but it's stuff that I bought and I no longer need.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big difference between the consumer perception and the whole issue of business to consumer, and in the business to business world, a very sharp emphasis now on costs, because as different countries actually start to impose different levels of landfill tax, there's a very serious issue around designing out waste and making sure that we don't bring waste into the value chain.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it sort of also brings in the interesting issue that something like e-commerce, actually it's very clear what you're paying for in service, in that it says if you want it next day, you've got to pay a premium. If you want to just have it whenever it comes along in 2 or 3 days, you can wait and see how long it takes and so on. I guess the question is, has the time come when organizations should be saying the environmental impact, on average, if you wait 2 or 3 days, we can really put it on an efficient route. Whereas if you want it same day, you're going to have a guy sitting on a motorbike, especially for you, and that's got quite an impact, whether it's an e-bike or a petrol bike. So I think there's some interesting sort of opportunities to make it a positive, though potentially you then steer people away from the premium services and them paying for those services, which may be generating a margin. So Mahmoud, what are your thoughts on the sustainability, on the reputational thing, positive or negative for organizations?
Surely. Many companies are embracing sustainability. I mean, for us, PwC, we are committing for carbon neutral by 2030, for example. So it's not only manufacturers that are committing for sustainable practices. However, like I said, and I've read many studies on that sustainable packaging, for example, for consumer products is influencing the consumer decision. And having said that, with the build of more awareness and the build of more awareness on the impact that it creates, I believe it could be number one, a marketing driver for the products, but at the same time, it's extremely positive for the image of the company, and to show that they are committed to the environment and to the people, and they are returning to the people, and they are making the effort. Again, change management is always the difficulty, probably, which requires some effort. However, it's doable all the time.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah, I think I jumped to Mahmoud instead of to you. So Sarah, your thoughts on the sustainability challenge and opportunity?
I think companies are really facing a challenge there, because I think there is the decade of our lives, isn't it, as it is called. So I think one of the challenges is multiple generations being impacted and receiving information in different ways. So if you look at Gen Z, they will be searching for some aspects of sustainability. You have companies like Loanhood, where you can loan your clothes. You have vintage. You have all these different ways, and then you have other generations that see the brand and want the shiny, beautiful packaging without actually necessarily thinking about how it came to be so shiny. So I think there is a real challenge for companies to manage their reputation and actually find their position within their consumers. When it comes to the B2B, to Sean, and a little bit to what you said, Mahmoud, I think I always say that is valuing leading by example, right? So I think companies have to have their standards. So if you have a 2025, 2030 goal, science-based targets, right? Make sure that you disclose, make sure that you bring your suppliers, at least the tier 1 suppliers together, and ask the suppliers at tier 1 to bring their tier 1. and their tier ones to bring their tier ones. So you really cascade that through your network.
Yeah.
And I think there is an element of tolerance as well. So I think it's not just having a zero tolerance. I think to accelerate the process, we need to acknowledge that our suppliers may not know, and they may need to learn. So the quicker we can get that through, the better for the world, rather than saying, oh, you don't do this, you're out.
Yes.
Let's be inclusive. Let's bring the network together.
Thank you. And finally, Anthony, your thoughts on the reputation side of things.
Yeah, I think let's first acknowledge that most all organizations understand that their environmental concern does impact their reputation. And that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that most organizations at least talk the talk, but it's a curse in that it could incentivize greenwashing in a lot of ways as well. People just saying the right thing, but not necessarily taking any meaningful action. And so walking the walk is always more difficult. One thing that I've personally seen as I go out and interview and hire, especially recruiting through universities, is that candidates are very interested not just in what's my pay, what's my job role, but how does this organization fit within the bigger scheme of things that I value? And it could be a wide range of things, not just sustainability, but that's being evaluated by both customers and by potential employees as well. And so I think that's a good thing. Organizations need to make sure that they are catering to their customers and to their potential employees. Otherwise, they risk losing those as well. So I think it plays a very large role, your reputation.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Yeah, and it's a great way to finish, to remind ourselves it's not just around cost, but it can affect your sales, it can affect your employment, your growth, and in so many different ways. Well, thank you all four of you for some fantastic contributions there. It's a very wide and complex subject, and I think beforehand one of you was saying, God, we could spend an hour on just one of the agenda points, let alone trying to cover three of them and an interesting article. So thank you all four of you. I need to award the Supply Chain Talk mug, which I think no surprises goes to Grayson Moores. Thank you, Grayson, for some great comments there and some good questions. And we promise not to cancel your Amazon subscription, as you commented on. The next week's episode is at the same time on Wednesday, the 5th of July at 4 p.m. UK time. And the subject is supply chain talent of the future. So always a really interesting one. And indeed, it touches on the appeal of organizations in so many ways to attract and retain talent. So finally, thank you again to my panelists, Sarah Robbins, Global Supplier Sustainability Lead at Johnson Matthey, Sean McCarthy, Chair of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, Mahmoud Abud-Laja, Senior Manager for Supply Chain Efficiency at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Riyadh. And finally, Anthony Jenkins, Senior Product Manager for Sustainability at Amazon Business. So thank you all four of you. Thank you, audience, for joining us. And we look forward to you joining us again next week. Goodbye.